Since the days of old, Europeans have had a strong sense of pride in their heritage. Historical landmarks are well protected, and many of their structures are several hundred years old and are a huge tourist attraction. In some locations of the Old World, many structures go back to biblical times, and they mystify us till this very day. But in America, it's out with the old and in with the new. In the town of Fayetteville, Tennessee, a shopping center now stands where Fort Blount once stood. This is the location where Andrew Jackson formed his army that fought against the Creek Indians and eventually the British in the War of 1812. All that remains today is a plaque and 2 lone oak trees. In neighboring Franklin County, concerned citizens came together to preserve Polly Crockett's grave. Hopefully this piece of heritage will always be preserved and keep the memory of David Crockett and his first wife Polly alive. In Rutherford, Tennessee, the final home place of David Crockett before he went to the Alamo, there stands a cabin in his honor. This little log home has become a teaching tool for young and old alike. Under the faithful leadership of curator Joe Bone, David Crockett's Cabin is still open to the public today. Upcoming is an interview with the man who has dedicated much of his life to the preservation of this cabin and David Crockett's memory.
If you noticed on the Crockett video, in the opening scenes, you noticed that David Crockett was, well, he was getting dressed and getting ready to go on his hunting trip with his brother-in-law, William Patton. Well, a lot of it, the opening sequence, was shot here in the interior of Crockett's Cabin. Now, the interesting thing about Crockett's Cabin, this happens to be in it's close to the location where he departed to go to Texas, to the Alamo. This is where he left his family, Elizabeth and the children, when he went off to Texas. And the house, well, it's got quite the story. Wound up almost becoming firewood and kindling for a bunch of carnival workers at one time. And the present day shape that it's in now, well, it had to be, it's the concerns of some local people, and actually some people from all over the United States and the world that kicked in. Walt Disney put out a movie. Fess Parker played Davy Crockett. And a lot of concerned people, that brought the knowledge of David Crockett to the forefront. And a lot of people, they didn't want to see this cabin go to ruin, go to waste. And this gentleman standing next to me, Mr. Joe Bone, happens to be one of those individuals that wants to see this cabin continue to be a landmark, a monument of Colonel David Crockett, one of my heroes and one of your heroes. And I guess, Joe, more than anything, I guess being part of the Heritage Keepers of America, this actually is a Heritage Keeper location. I invite people to come in and see the cabin from all over the world, sending out publications trying to say, hey, come look at this location and see where Crockett used to live. And Joe, I guess more than anything, I'd like to ask you, and get in your own words, why is preservation so important? Why is your job and my job so important to preserve these relics?
Well, as we have just seen with the young people visiting here, that things have changed so much, and I feel it's important for them to see how their ancestors used to live, and of course to know about the heroes and the leaders of those days of the early 1800s. And when you have a building like this, where the logs at least are that old, and some of them actually were from the homes that the Crockett family lived in, then that means a lot more. And then we have household items in here donated by other families from that same time period. So we have a pretty good museum, and I think it's really helpful to those who are interested in history to have it, and probably to those who are not interested in history that at some time or another need to be reminded of what this country and this section of the country has been through.
Well, we have so many modern day distractions, and today children, they have their game stations, and they have their computers, and even in school we have we have sports, and we have after school sports, and children, they're so occupied, it seems like we're running from place to place and here and yon, and we don't seem to have time to learn American history anymore. But I guess, Joe, more than anything, I want people to know and understand that American history is personal. You're a part of American history, and so am I.
Some of our politicians says all politics is local. Well, to me, history begins here.
It does.
With how your family got here from the east, and how they survived, and it just opens up such an interesting subject. A lot of people do genealogy, and it's not important really whether you had somebody famous in your family back in England or somewhere, but it's what the people did to survive and continue that family on the frontier that's always interested me.
Well, one of the things I always tell my students when I visit schools, if you have a family tree, and everybody does, whether they've drawn it on paper or not, you have a family tree.
Yeah.
And whether you realize it or not, you are a part of American history because you are an American.
Right.
Well, hopefully you are.
Right.
So if you're an American and you have a family tree, which that should be unanimous on everybody viewing this tape or in an audience where I visit, you're part of American history, past, present, and future.
Right.
And believe it or not, 150 years from now, even some of those that are viewing this tape, what you'll wind up seeing is American history will be studied and you lived through it. 150 years from now, when somebody's studying American history, they'll be studying about a period you lived through. Well, that's all we're trying to do in preserving American history for those that lived through it 150 to 200 years ago, like David Crockett.
Right.
We want people to remember his contribution to the state of Tennessee and to this country. And the freedom of Texas, it becoming a republic, they owe a lot to Colonel David Crockett and those who fought at the Alamo.
His motto was, always be sure you're right, then go ahead. And like the rest of us mortals, he didn't always know what was right. He came pretty close to it, but he made some mistakes. But he is such a symbol of the Western movement. Of course, I know 50 years earlier Daniel Boone was too. But Crockett represented the common man and the people who made the way after the first explorers, and the Tennessee and Texas are always bound together by people like him and Sam Houston, of course.
Yeah. Well, students, I just wanted you to understand, and those in the viewing audience that are adults, heritage preservation is up to you. It's up to me and people like Mr. Joe Bone here. Whatever you can do to preserve your family history, that's part of heritage preservation. If there's an old graveyard or monument near your home, it may need saving. The bulldozers are running every day, and pieces of our history are disappearing for industrial sprawl and such and so forth. So know that you're very much a part of heritage preservation. Mr. Joe, I appreciate your time and appreciate your contribution to heritage preservation and keeping Crockett's Cabin open. Be talking to you soon.
Keeping the history of David Crockett and each piece of American history alive is an important task. It's not the task for just a few, it's the responsibility of each and every American. It's the task that must be done before our history totally fades into the past.
might have played that on the fiddle.
I've seen the movie of the Alamo.
Uh-huh.